Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Horizon News. Bloomberg has a big take, which is an in-depth article on the economy of South Africa, particularly the over-reliance of the government on the private sector. There's the headline. It says the only thing keeping South Africa from chaos is its private sector. We have to jump in here with who better than Sanyade Okoli, a titan in the private sector space here in Nigeria, CEO of Alpha African Advisory. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning, Reuters.
Good to have you. Is that, we've talked South Africa quite a lot. Is that an exaggeration, or what do you make of that piece?
Okay, so let me ask you the question. As you said, we've spoken about South Africa quite a bit.
Yeah, so
what's your take?
It sounds accurate.
Given the stories we've
Right.
been talking about, Eskom, South African Airways, etc., etc. And when you read the rest of the article, I think it's a fair title.
There's some quotes from there. I think we can start with the CEO of Standard Bank Group, the South Africa unit, where he says it's not altruism. That is what they're doing. You can't run a successful private business in a sea of chaos. What do you make of that? Are they almost forced to have to make up for government? What do you make of that quote?
I think if we step back and look at, even referring to your opening, some of the stories we've spoken about, Eskom, for example, and how its operations have deteriorated over a period of time, and the amount of load shedding that the businesses and individuals have to suffer from. Businesses need to operate. So if Eskom or government cannot provide power, cannot provide infrastructure, cannot provide security, then they need to do it. The only thing we all need to remember is government has a duty to provide basic services. When, for one reason or the other, government does not meet those responsibilities, businesses and individuals will have to fill that gap.
Wow.
When they have to do that, what you find is it erodes the confidence, the trust, and respect in government, but worse still, by extension, the authority that government has over its people. It's a great shame that South Africa is where it is today. But if we step back, it's not a complete surprise. And I tell you why. They had decades of apartheid, right? What does apartheid do? In addition to all the other structural things that we know, what it's also done is to break the spirit of the people. And you've got to ask yourself, to what extent where the blacks as a group, we've known the individuals, Mandela did well, Thabo Mbeki, etc.
Yeah.
But to what extent were the blacks as a group prepared for leadership of the country?
Right.
To what extent were they prepared to take leadership positions, not just in government, but in the private sector, in the NGOs, etc.? Because at the end of the day, there are certain, in addition to technical hard skills, there are mindsets required for you to be able to function effectively in these roles. There are soft skills that are required. And the way they had been treated and the way many of them have grown up, it hasn't really prepared them.
Gotcha.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, hey, but excellent take. So I think the chairman of Nedbank, he said that basically, I think we have his quote as well. I think he was talking about them basically falling into the risk of becoming a failed state. Is the most so we South Africa are indeed, as many have said, running the risk of becoming a failed state because we're already on borrowed time. It sounds so ominous, but can the most industrialized economy on the African continent be really at risk of becoming a failed, that's a heavy word, heavy phrase, failed state?
So what does it mean, a failed state? A failed state is really where the government has lost control of its people, its economy, its borders. Again, when you look at all the things the private sector is having to do to just keep South Africa going, remember I just said, if government and individuals are having to do that, sorry, if private sector and individuals are having to provide basic services, government will lose authority. So I would hope to God they don't become a failed state, but they are right, certainly the path they are on. If deliberate and timely steps are not taken, the direction is worrying.
Yeah, is there.
And because we've seen it over time, as I said, if you chronicle our conversations.
Airways, ESCOM.
If you look at all the key economic indices, from GDP growth to GDP per capita to debt to GDP ratios to unemployment, and not just over the last 3 years or 5 years, but if you go sort of 10, 12 years, they're worse. GDP per capita is about, in the last 10 years, it's reduced about 20%.
Wow.
Unemployment rate has gone from about 22%
it's one of the highest in the world.
32%.
Right, 32, arguably the highest in the world.
Their Gini coefficient, you know, that measures the disparity in income between in a society, I think they have the worst.
South Africa is said to be the most unequal as far as the income inequality is concerned on the whole globe. Can I ask you about speaking truth to power? Because I think this is one of Mr. President Ramaphosa's economic advisors. She's on his council. She says that the government has, there she is. So that's Tabi Lioka, an economist. The government has failed South Africans in terms of what it's supposed to do, which is provide services for citizens. What do you make of that?
I think as good citizens, we do have a responsibility to speak truth to power. But I'm also incredibly mindful that a lot of our cultures in this part of the world does not create the environment for people to speak truth to power. And honestly, if you ask me, I think that is one of the most destructive things. I think that if we really, as nations and as a continent, want to move forward, we're going to have to revisit some of our cultural practices. Otherwise, even as a business leader, I remember, I might have told you this story, many years ago, we were working on an investment transaction and we'd gone to Sierra Leone, we'd done DD, et cetera, and somehow, I was just quite fortunate that day, I invited my team members that were working on the transaction to tell me what they really thought. And they didn't buy into the transaction, and they were the ones analyzing it. But had I not given them the space to speak truth to power, we would have done what they knew was a bad transaction. And I see it time and time again, both from a business standpoint and a government standpoint, where the leader is heading headlong at speed into a ditch and nobody tells them. Everybody can see, but nobody tells them. And we need to take responsibility as leaders to create that environment so we can hear the truth and not just what we want to hear or what people think we want to hear.
Well said. What can the private sector demand in return for filling these gaps that government has created? Can you quickly, in 30 seconds, is it less taxes or?
I'd be very careful about private sector demanding anything, because that's going to get the government's back up. So, but what they can request, politely request or firmly request is they need, what we need from government, what private sector anywhere needs from government is, firstly, government put the right building blocks. Let's have security. Let's have rule of law, basic level. Put in place the right governance structure that would enable you as government to operate effectively. Then layer it with sound policies and leave us to get on with it.
And you will, and the private sector will, automatically.
Well, at least, you have to put some guardrails, but where any of those things are broken, it makes life incredibly difficult.
Insightful stuff. It's good to have you back on the show. Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory. Thanks for joining us.